All right, this lighting is shit. I kind of lost my voice a little bit, but I did want to make a quick video about. Um, there's been a lot of suspension stuff that I've dealt with over the last, 15 years. Um, and, it keeps coming up more and more now, which is great. Um, but I will have a vehicle here relatively soon, I think within the next month and a half, that I can do corner balancing, um, full suspension, geometry, bump steer correction, roll center correction, ride height, chassis tuning to a proper fine degree. And I'll have that together here for you guys, and I can make a whole video series of it. So, if that's in any way interesting to you, let me know. Um, it's definitely more of, again, black art stuff that I'm continuing to expose, that I think is a very simple thing for me because I've done it, I've felt it real world. Um, when you start to drive cars with respect at a high rate of speed, you're respecting the roads, the mountains, whatever you're on. And you're going to start to feel and experience things differently. You're dancing the car. You are much more critical as to your feedback from your steering input, your braking pedal pulsation, um, small, minute throttle inputs. All of these things will make you a better driver when you start to understand them at a very, very deep level. That feel needs to translate in tuning both the engine and the suspension of the car. And I believe there's a huge disconnect between, let's say, alignment settings and the actual understanding of a coilover, its function for suspension. And then you have the geometry of the vehicle itself. So you're going to have things that are dictating Ackerman angle, things that are dictating camber gain or loss, bump steers when your toe angle is changing dynamically versus the height. So I have a bump steer gauge here that's digital. You take the coilover off, you set it, where ride height would have been, you put a jack there. That's your 0 point. You mark all those points. And then you do the stroke of the suspension up and down until you get the tie rod at the correct height to where you're zeroing out, or as close to as possible, the arc of the suspension as it goes through the stroke. I can put together all these videos in a very professional manner. The problem is that the more effort that I seem to put into this sort of stuff, the less I'm getting out of it, if that makes any sense. I can spend more time, educate, go through all of these smaller details with you guys, but the view quantity is not there. Every time I go to edit a video or take the time and put hours and hours into something, there's no competition compared to where I just shoot a quick video like this. This gets a lot more views. This gets a lot more input from others. And so what I'm trying to do is I need to value my time. I need to know that what I'm doing is worthwhile. And, I'll have a video series from way back that I could bring up and be like, oh yeah, I already explained this. I explained coilover setup and when to do more rebound, when to do more compression, and certain spring rates and how to calculate all that stuff. But if no one watches it and it's not being helpful, right? So what is the best way that you guys are able to find your, let's say, motorsport information that is not at a basic level, that is not like, now see, there's a million views in the very easy stuff, right? But when you're getting to the connection of the feel of the driver and the driver's inputs and how to correct certain things like seating position's huge. Steering position is huge. I go through all of these things with people that I will like coach in driving, and I'll say, okay, well, the reason why you're having this reaction is because you didn't feel the grip coming up, and you're overdriving the car because you're not feeling the car. And when you have to drive to, you're essentially exceeding a limit, catching it, exceeding a limit, catching it, exceeding a limit, catching it. The better thing to do is you treat it like an egg toss, to where you are capturing the grip of the car and not like forcing it, exceeding the egg, and then you're like, hey, I've got scraps of egg in my hand. The way that that comes down to grip control and consistency gives you the buffer zone, so that when you do want to drive at a faster rate of speed, your, let's say, 7/10, they would call it, so you're driving at 70% of the capacity of the car, 70% of the capacity of the driver. When conditions pop up, that will take up and soak up that 30%. That's undulations in the road, leaves, water, whatever gravel consistency crap could be on there. We try to be respectful of where we're driving, right? We try to be respectful of other people who are driving this road. Don't be an asshole. Don't double lane. Drive with commitment. Drive with understanding of what the chassis is doing underneath you, the inputs of the vehicle, stuff like that. So, I will be putting together, I'm already deciding it now, a video series for an FCRX7, which is a McPherson Strut multi-link rear end car. And I have all the tools imaginable to make it corrected. Now, this car has been to a alignment shop who has no fucking clue what they're doing. And this is someone who is in our industry as a professional, a shop, like automotive wrenching guy. Like, we're not talking like a Firestone. We're talking like an aftermarket specialized shop that does not know what they're doing. And the FC, being a McPherson Strut front end, the roll center goes to absolute shit the second you go away from the factory ride height. So what happens when roll center is in the ground or low? Well, roll center is your effective lever arm of the suspension in regards to the effective spring rate. So when you go to roll, if your arm is very short, it's easy to topple. If your arm is very long, this is ground versus wherever the roll center would be located. If this is very long, it takes a lot more energy to get this moving, okay? Versus a little tiny thing just goes boop. So what ends up happening is when you lower the vehicle, the roll center shrinks in height and sometimes can go into the ground with its effective height. And so let's say you had a 400-pound spring. Well, a 400-pound spring on a McPherson Strut that had a standard factory geometry would be, with a motion ratio around 1, around 400 pounds effective on the corner. That's not counting the lower control arm, not counting all the other stuff. It's relative, okay? We're saying it's about 400 pounds. Now, when you lower that vehicle, that roll center has now changed to where that 400-pound spring might not be 400 pounds effective at the end of the car. It's going to lower the effective spring rate at the end of the car. Now, is it a huge factor? You can calculate it out. I can show you guys. It's something to the effect of, let's say, 20% for a car that's slammed. And when you're talking a difference of 20%, that's a pretty big margin. When we're talking, if we had 20% off on our fueling for a car, it's grenaded. So all these things go into play when we're talking vehicle configuration and setup. And some people would say, oh, I just run a heavier spring rate. Well, what happens when you have a heavier spring rate is if a road has bumps in it, which they all do, your heavy spring rate car is going to essentially ride over the bumps of the road and skip and hop. And you're decreasing the overall grip of the vehicle every time you increase the spring rate. And really, if you look at every factory vehicle, a great one is like a Mark V Supra, incredibly soft factory configuration. And what they're doing well is their bushing and their geometry is amazing, but the car will soak up the bumps, and then it's going to rely on the anti-roll bar to control the side to side, which is how it should be. It's how I believe NASCAR started doing what they call soft spring hard bar, and a few other racing series did the same thing, because you're gaining the effective grip back, obviously without aerodynamic problems of some series, but you're gaining the effective grip back of having a softer rate to absorb with the shock and not over exert it. So when you have a higher spring rate, the rate in which your rebound has to be, the force per second, has to be significantly higher to now compensate for a very quick spring to catch that. Otherwise, it's going to continue undulating. And ideally, when you hit a bump, you want it to go bump once. You don't want it to go over and over again. And we're going to create an issue where we have so many negative things combined with each other with one mistake that it's better to start from where you understand, right? Geometry needs to be handled first. Geometry needs to be handled, and then we go through and we effectively pick a spring rate that is going to be closer to a factory rate than an aftermarket rate, if you will. Because the aftermarket rate is going off of what people think is fast, but actually isn't very fast, which is why the OEMs do what they do to focus on a slower ride frequency and actually retain grip of the vehicle. So I think this video series is going to be kind of fun. I really want to know what you guys are specifically looking for, because I'm going to cover a lot. Like, even this intro video probably covered more than you guys expected. So let me know what you think, and we'll go through some crazy fucking details. I cannot release some of the Excel spreadsheets that I have specific to my car, because those are owned by a chassis engineer, a buddy of mine, and I cannot reveal that information. What I can do is I can explain what might be good targets to aim for. And all of these will change based on the geometry of the vehicle, based on the type of suspension of the vehicle. So if we have a solid axle car, is different than a multi-link rear end. We have McPherson struts different than double wishbone. We'll just have different things that I can kind of explain, and how we're gaining. Some setups are stronger than others, so they have less deflection. Some setups are heavier than others, but they've got camber gain, stuff like that. So there's always going to be a trade-off. And in the big scheme of things, if you understand the basics and the roots of what creates and maintains grip, that's a big part, then you can figure out how to set up your car properly. And it won't be such a big mystery. Because for me, like I said, I've driven mountain cars and stuff for 15 years. I understand, like, I'll watch another driver and I'll say, that dude does not know what the fuck he's doing. And, coaching people on track, it's the same kind of thing. Like, you watch and you say, they need to focus on braking zones first, and then you need to focus on throttle modulation, if at all, because really it should just be off, on, Same with brake, but I'll get there. And you can see that the majority of the faults that people are trying to correct for on their cars in an aftermarket sense has actually nothing to do with the car, and it's purely the driver and the way that they're inputting. And because it has been, I would say, such a big trend to do aftermarket suspension, people are losing sight of why they're doing it to begin with, or why A setup, B setup, whatever it is, ends up being a faster configuration or a more comfortable configuration or whatever it is. And there are a lot of name brands out there that you would be amazed how crappy they are on a real world surface. So I'll go through that stuff, but I want to be more specific to educating and helping you guys figure out exactly what your car needs to match you as a driver, and then also improve your driving skills, because that's where it all comes down to. You can have a really shitty car, even poorly set up if you want, but a good driver will glaze over that and have no problem. And the same thing is, you can have a perfectly set up car with like no bump steer, no understeer, absolute neutral, and you have a shitty driver, and the driver will go exceed those limitations of its grip and then try to backpedal and then exceed and then backpedal, and all of those will make it feel like it's a car thing, and it's not. You got to take responsibility for your actions. So that's it for now. Hopefully you guys like this video. I'm going to go through and make a whole series for you. So I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.